The choosing ceremony had not yet begun, but Ashvale Palace was already alive with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with the feasting tables. Moonstone lanterns swayed on iron chains above the great hall, throwing cold, silver light across polished marble floors and the iron-framed pillars wrapped in silver ivy. Silk banners in deep crimson hung from the rafters, the mark of the Ashvale royal pack, and below them, long tables groaned beneath roasted boar, honeyed wine, and bread so rich the scent of it made Sarah's hands tremble. She was not here to eat. She was never here to eat. She moved along the edge of the hall with her tray pressed flat against her chest, keeping her shoulders low and her gaze down. The way she had been taught since she was 7 years old. The way the servants moved in Ashvale, invisible, soundless, beneath notice. The way Omegas moved when they wanted to survive the night without incident. She was 19, and she had learned survival the way most girls learned embroidery. One careful stitch at a time. The hall was full. 300 wolves, the finest blood in the northern realm, gathered under one roof at the command of the Alpha King. Lords and ladies of allied packs had arrived in ceremonial dress, their wolves barely leashed beneath expensive fabrics and courtly smiles. The Beta Council stood in a row near the raised dais, their faces carved into expressions of careful neutrality. On every other face in the hall, Sarah could read something else entirely: anticipation, hunger, political calculation. Tonight, the Alpha King would announce his chosen queen. Sarah did not let herself think about that. She moved to the nearest table and refilled goblets with practiced efficiency, her eyes tracing the floor tiles, counting them out of habit. 4, 5, 6. The cold marble seeped through her thin-soled shoes and up into her ankles. She had not eaten since morning. A heel of bread and half a cup of water, which was what head steward Mira allowed the serving Omegas during ceremony preparation, because the kitchen staff needed to focus, and Omegas, Mira liked to say, were most useful when hungry. Hungry servants didn't linger, didn't think, didn't take up space in ways that mattered. Sarah understood what Mira meant beneath those words. She had understood it for years. She was halfway down the second table when the doors at the far end of the hall opened and the silence came. It always came that way when he entered, not announced by trumpets or ceremony, but by a falling away of all sound, as though the room itself inhaled and forgot to exhale. 300 wolves went still. Goblets hovered halfway to lips. Conversations dissolved mid-sentence. Sarah did not look up. She kept pouring. She heard the footsteps instead, slow, measured, unhurried, the walk of a man who had never needed to rush toward anything in his life because the world had always stopped for him. The Alpha King's footsteps had a particular cadence that she had memorized in her 2 years of service here, the same way she had memorized the sound of the kitchen door when Mira was in a temper, or the creak of the third step on the eastern staircase where she needed to place her weight carefully in the dark. She knew which sounds meant danger. These footsteps were dangerous in a different way, a way she did not have a name for. She poured the last goblet and turned to retreat back toward the kitchen corridor when a hand closed around her arm. Not gently. Wolfless girl. The voice belonged to Lady Cressida Vane, daughter of the Vane Pack's head Beta, 23 years old, and possessed of the particular cruelty that came from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. Her fingers were cold, and her grip was deliberate. "I have been waiting for wine for a quarter of an hour. Do you understand what it means when I raise my goblet?" Sarah steadied her tray. "Forgive me, my lady. I was serving the far end of I did not ask for an explanation." Cressida's voice carried. It was designed to carry. I asked if you understood. Say it. Say you understand. Around them, several wolves had turned to watch. The nearest, a lord from the southern pack with deep-set eyes and a half-smile, leaned back in his chair as if settling in for entertainment. Sarah looked at the woman's hand on her arm. She thought of the bread she had not eaten. She thought of the cold through her shoes. She thought of Mira's voice that morning, sharp and efficient. You serve tonight without error, wolfless girl, or I will find someone else to serve in your place, and you will find yourself outside the palace gates by morning. I understand, my lady, she said. Cressida smiled. It did not reach her eyes. Then pour. Sarah poured. She was 3 steps away when she heard Cressida's voice again, pitched now for the benefit of the table. Wolfless and graceless. The omegas they allow in this palace now, it is a wonder the Alpha King can hold his appetite. A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby seats. Sarah kept walking. She pressed through the service door into the narrow corridor beyond, and stood there a moment with her back against the stone wall, her tray against her ribs, her eyes dry. She did not cry in corridors where anyone might pass. She had rules about that. She had rules about many things: where to stand, when to speak, how long to breathe before moving again. She counted to 5. Then she went back to the kitchen and picked up a fresh decanter and went back through the door. She did not see the figure who stood still at the edge of the raised dais as she re-entered the hall. She did not see the way the conversation at his side had stopped, or the way his attention had shifted in the half moment she'd been gone, tracking the service door with a stillness that was altogether different from the polished stillness of a king performing ceremony. She did not see his jaw tighten, or the way the beta at his shoulder, a broad, watchful man named Davan, cut a quick look toward the laughing table and then back at the king's face. She did not see any of it. She went back to work. The hall reached its peak an hour later. The musicians played low and deliberate, a melody that carried the weight of occasion in every slow measure, and the assembled wolves fell into something approaching reverence when the Alpha King ascended the dais and turned to face the room. Sarah pressed herself against the far wall beside the other serving omegas, her tray now empty, her hands folded in front of her. This was the part of the evening she was required to witness. Every servant in the hall was required to stand in attendance at the choosing, not because their presence mattered, but because ceremony demanded witness, and omegas were useful for filling a room with bodies when the hall needed to look full. She looked at him for the first time. She had seen the Alpha King from a distance before crossing a courtyard, or mounted on horseback beyond the palace gates, or seated at the far end of a dining hall where she had no business looking. She had never been this close. 12 feet, perhaps. Close enough to see the angle of his jaw, and the way his silver and black ceremonial tunic sat against the breadth of his shoulders. Close enough to note that his eyes were the color of iron in low light gray that was almost black, and that the expression on his face was one she recognized instinctively. Not pride, not warmth, not even the cold performance of royal detachment that she had expected. She recognized the expression because she wore it herself sometimes in the quiet of her narrow room at the end of the corridor. When there was no one to see, he looked like a man who was doing what was required of him. Nothing more, nothing less. By the sacred compact of the northern packs, he began, and his voice was a low thing, not raised, not performing. It simply filled the room the way a deep current fills a riverbed, because it had nowhere else to go. And in accordance with the rites of alliance, I name my chosen queen of Ashvale. The room held itself. Not a breath moved. Lady Isolde of the Crestmere pack. The eruption was immediate, not shock, Sarah understood, because the court had known this was coming. It had been whispered through the servant corridors for weeks. Lady Isolde was beautiful, politically advantageous, the only daughter of the Crestmere Alpha whose territory controlled the western trade routes. The match made sense in every way that mattered to kingdoms and councils. Sarah watched Lady Isolde rise from her seat at the head table. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in deep blue that made every other woman in the room look underdressed, and glide toward the dais with the precise confidence of someone who had practiced this walk. She was radiant. She was appropriate. She was exactly what a queen of Ashvale should look like. Sarah looked away. She was looking at the floor when she felt it. It was not pain. It was not quite heat. It was the sudden, inexplicable certainty that something in the room had shifted, that some invisible current had been disturbed, or that the air itself was attending to something it had not noticed before. A sensation like being watched. But deeper than that, older than that. She pressed her heels together and kept her eyes down. She did not look up again. She did not see that the Alpha King had not yet looked at Lady Isolde. She did not see that his gaze had moved, unbidden, against every protocol of ceremony, to the far wall where the serving Omegas stood in their gray uniforms. She did not see the way his body had gone absolutely, dangerously still in the half-second before he mastered himself and turned back to the woman at his side. She did not see his wolf move behind his eyes. But Davan saw it. And Davan said nothing. 3 days passed. Sarah moved through them the way she always moved through time in the palace, carefully, usefully, without drawing attention. She scrubbed the long corridor of the east wing on her hands and knees because the ceremony had left candle wax dripped across 40 feet of marble. And it was the kind of task given to the Omegas without wolves, the ones whose hands could work without complaint. She carried linens. She emptied chamber pots. She did not speak unless spoken to, and she did not make eye contact with anyone above the rank of senior servant. She thought about leaving. She thought about it the way she always thought about it in the early mornings before the palace woke, when she sat on the narrow ledge of her single window and looked out over the forest beyond the walls. She thought about the trees. She thought about the road south. She thought about what it would mean to walk out of the palace gates with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge, bitter and certain, that she had no pack to walk towards, no family, no wolf, no claim on any territory in the realm. Wolfless. The word had been her definition since she was old enough to understand definitions. She was the ward of Duchess Helene Voss, Lady Cressida's mother, who had taken her in at age 7, not out of kindness, but out of a debt owed to Sarah's dead father. A debt she had considered discharged the moment she'd placed Sarah in the servant rotation at Ashvale and stopped sending the quarterly stipend she was legally obligated to provide. Sarah had been raised in the Voss household until 12, then transferred here when the Duchess determined that her household had no further use for a wolfless girl who would never shift, never contribute to pack strength, never be anything other than a liability with 2 working hands. 2 working hands had turned out to be enough for the palace kitchens. She was scrubbing the corridor on the 4th morning when she heard the footsteps. She knew them. Of course she knew them. She pressed herself as flat against the wall as she could manage, her cloth still in her hand, her eyes on the floor, her heartbeat doing something she did not have the language to explain. "Leave us," the Alpha King's voice, not directed at her at the 2 guards who had been stationed at the end of the corridor. She heard them withdraw. Silence. She kept scrubbing. "You are working on cold stone in bare feet. She had not realized her shoes had come off at the far end of the corridor, where she'd set them aside to keep from tracking wax back over the cleaned sections. She became suddenly acutely aware of the cold beneath her feet and the state of her hair, which she had tied back, but which had come loose on one side, and the gray uniform that was clean but thin, visibly thin in a way that would be apparent to anyone standing above her. She sat back on her heels and looked up. He was closer than she had calculated from the sound of his footsteps. He stood 4 feet away, dressed in simple dark clothes, no ceremony, no regalia, and he was looking at her with the iron-gray eyes she had catalogued from across the hall 3 nights ago. Close up, they were unsettling in a way she had not anticipated. Not cold exactly, precise. The way a wolf looks at something it is deciding how to approach. "I am fine, my lord," she said. "You are not." She had no answer for that. Because he was right, and the truth of that sat plainly in his gaze, she was not fine. She had not been fine for a long time, and something about the directness of him made the usual architecture of her deflections feel suddenly inadequate. She began to rise. "Don't." He said it quietly. Not a command, or not only a command. Something else moved beneath the word, something she didn't know what to do with. "You will stand on cold stone in bare feet, and that will not improve the situation." She stared at him. "My lord, I need to. There is bread in the eastern sitting room." He did not look away. "The fire is lit. No one will be in there until this evening." She waited for the rest of the sentence, the part where the instruction became an expectation, the part where his generosity revealed its shape. Every kindness in this palace had a shape. She had learned that, a geometry of obligation and return. He said nothing else. He looked at her for one more moment, that precise, unreadable look, and then he turned and walked back the way he had come. She sat on the cold floor for a long time after the sound of his footsteps had faded. Then she went to the eastern sitting room. The fire was lit. There was bread. There was also a bowl of warm broth that had not been there by accident, and a pair of thick wool stockings folded on the hearthstone in a size that was, improbably, close to hers. She sat in front of the fire and ate and did not cry about it. She was very firm about that. She was almost done when the door opened and the small face of a child appeared in the gap. A boy, perhaps 6 years old, with a crown of dark curls and the wide, solemn eyes of someone who had learned to move quietly through large spaces. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You smell like rain," he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" He came fully into the room, apparently having decided she was not a threat, and sat down on the hearthrug across from her with the absolute confidence of a child who had never been told he was not welcome anywhere. "My wolf says you smell like rain and old moonstone. He says it's important." She looked at the child. "Who are you?" "Pip." He said it as if this was sufficient information. "I live here." "Who are you?" "Sarah." He considered this. "Do you have a wolf?" The question hit her in the usual place. She managed the usual expression, the slight flattening, the controlled withdrawal. "No." Pip looked at her with his solemn eyes and said, with the devastating directness of the very young, "My wolf doesn't believe you." That evening, Sarah sought out the only person in the palace whose warmth she trusted even a little. Nessa was a fellow servant older than Sarah by 4 years, a low-ranking Omega who had served in Ashvale since she was 14 and knew every shadow and stone of the palace with the intimacy of long survival. She was small and quick, and she had a habit of talking with her hands when she was frightened, which Sarah found oddly comforting. They sat in the cramped warmth of the laundry room, surrounded by the smell of lye and clean linen, while Nessa pressed a heated cloth against the cut on Sarah's left hand, the one she had opened on the edge of a broken wine rack in the storeroom that morning, the kind of wound that was small and stupid and hurt more than it had any right to. "You need to stay away from the East Wing," Nessa said. Sarah looked at her hand. "I work the East Wing, then stay away from the Eastern sitting room more specifically." Nessa tied off the cloth with a knot that was tighter than necessary. "Because people have noticed." "Noticed what?" "That you were in there this morning." Nessa looked up. Her eyes were worried in that tight, careful way. Cressida Vane noticed. She was visiting her mother's suite, and she came past in the corridor, and the fire was lit, and the bread was out, and you were eating bread," Sarah said flatly. Sarah. "It was bread, Nessa. I was hungry. It was the Alpha King's private sitting room." Nessa kept her voice low. "And there are people in this palace who are very invested in cataloging anything unusual about his behavior. You understand? Lady Isolde's household, the council, Cressida's mother, who wants Cressida to be appointed senior lady-in-waiting to the new queen, which means she is watching everything and everyone." She pressed the cloth a little firmer. "Stay invisible. You are good at that." Sarah looked at the wall above Nessa's shoulder and thought about iron-gray eyes and wool stockings folded precisely on a hearthstone. "He sought me out," she said. Nessa went very still. "He was in the east corridor. He dismissed the guards. He told me about the bread." She kept her voice steady, factual, the way she kept everything. "He didn't ask for anything. He just told me, and then he left." Nessa was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," she said at last, and her voice had changed, gone careful and deliberate, the way people spoke when they were choosing words around something they were afraid to say. "Have you ever spoken to old Marin in the healer's wing?" "I've carried linens there." "Not about linens." Nessa released her hand and sat back, her own hands now folded in her lap, in a way that was too controlled to be casual. "Marin was here before the old king died. She knows things about this palace, about bloodlines, that she doesn't say aloud to most people." A pause. "You should speak to her, sometime soon." "Why?" Nessa looked at her with something in her eyes that Sarah had never been able to place. A look she had received from Nessa occasionally over the 2 years they had known each other, a look that was older than friendship and heavier than sympathy. "Because," Nessa said carefully, "the Alpha King does not leave bread and wool stockings for serving Omegas. Not unless his wolf is telling him something he hasn't caught up to yet." The next day, Lady Cressida Vane found Sarah in the linen corridor. She did not touch her this time. She stood in the narrow space between shelved linens and the stone wall, blocking the exit, and she wore an expression that Sarah had learned to read with precision in the years she had lived in the Voss household. Not cruelty exactly. Calculation with a fine edge of fear underneath, too sharp to see unless you knew where to look. "You think yourself clever?" Cressida said. Sarah held her linen stack and said nothing. "My mother has written to head steward Mira. By week's end, you will be reassigned to the outer kitchens, the ones below the east wing." She tilted her head. The smile was precise, a tool, not an expression. "You'll be underground, no corridors, no sitting rooms, no accidents." Sarah looked at her. She thought of the feel of that room's warmth, the bowl of broth, the stockings. She thought of Pip on the hearthrug saying, "My wolf doesn't believe you," and the particular quality of his seriousness. "Then I will work in the outer kitchens," she said. Cressida blinked. She had expected more. Distress, maybe, or the kind of brittle defiance that crumbled satisfyingly when pressed. She had not expected nothing. "You are nothing," she said, and the edge beneath the calculation came to the surface. "You have no wolf, no pack, no blood claim on anything." You are here because my mother arranged it, which means you exist here because I allow it." Her voice dropped. "Do not mistake whatever attention you have gathered this week for anything other than novelty. You are not interesting, you are not significant, and you are certainly not a mate." The last word landed like a blade between them. Sarah felt it. She did not know why she felt it. There was no reason for the word to land with that particular weight, but it did, spreading through her chest like something had been struck that was meant to ring. She looked at Cressida for a long moment. "Then I will work in the outer kitchens," she said again, quietly, and moved past her. She was 3 steps down the corridor when the dizziness came. It was not the first time. It had been happening for weeks, a sudden dropping sensation, as though the floor had briefly declined to be solid, followed by a rushing in her ears like wind through forest canopy. She had attributed it to hunger, to fatigue, to the cold, to all the practical reasons a body provides for failing in incremental ways. She caught herself on the wall. And then the wall was not the wall anymore, because her vision had narrowed to a point of white light, and she was going down. She heard her linen stack hit the floor. She did not hear much after that. She woke in the healer's wing. The ceiling above her was low stone, arched, and a single lamp burned on the table beside the narrow bed where she lay. She could smell herbs, something sharp and green, something older and sweeter beneath it. Her left hand, the one she'd cut, had been rewrapped with a competence that was distinct from Nessa's careful amateur effort. These bandages were immaculate. A woman sat in the chair beside the bed. She was old, genuinely old, not politely aged, with the kind of face that had been through decades of attention, and arrived somewhere on the far side of it. White hair wrapped in cloth. Dark eyes that missed nothing. The healer's mark on the back of her hand, 3 moon circles in iron ink, and the bearing of someone who had served in this palace longer than most of its current inhabitants had been alive. "You are Marin," Sarah said. The woman's mouth curved, just barely, "and you are more coherent than I expected." She reached forward and placed 2 fingers against Sarah's wrist, checking her pulse with the efficiency of long practice. "How long has the fainting been happening?" "Weeks. What else?" Sarah hesitated. "Heat, sometimes. A warmth that doesn't match the room temperature. And sounds. I hear things occasionally that no one else seems to hear. The sound of a wolf, in the distance. But there is no wolf." Marin was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. The quiet of someone choosing how much to say and in what order. "What do you know about your bloodline?" Marin asked. Sarah looked at the ceiling. "My father died when I was 6. My mother died when I was born. The Duchess Voss told me my parents were from a minor Southern Pack insignificant bloodline, no rank worth noting. She said my wolf simply never came in, that it happens occasionally with weak bloodlines." Marin's fingers stilled on her wrist. "She told you that?" she said. Something in her tone made Sarah look at her directly. "What do you know?" Sarah asked. The old woman released her wrist and sat back, and for a moment she looked tired. The kind of tired that comes not from the body, but from carrying a particular knowledge for too long, without being able to put it down. "Your father," Marin said slowly, "was not from a minor Southern Pack. His name was Kerwin. He was the last living son of the Moonstone bloodline, which is the oldest pack line in this realm, older than Ashvale, older than the Crestmere, older than any of the council families." She looked at Sarah steadily. His wolf was a silver, a rare form that has not been seen in 400 years. The Moonstone bloodline carries a specific sacred gift from the moon goddess. A pause. The ability to stabilize and amplify any bond. To complete what is broken. To call what is fated. Sarah's mouth was dry. My wolf never came in. Your wolf did not come in because someone ensured it could not. Marin leaned forward slightly. There are seals, old workings, pre-treaty blood magic that can suppress a wolf's emergence. They are illegal now. They have been illegal for 2 centuries. They require the knowledge of a practitioner who is old enough to have learned them before the ban. She held Sarah's gaze. They require someone with access to an infant. Sarah was very still. The Duchess Voss, she said. Marin said nothing. She did not need to. The warmth that came over Sarah then was not the heat of the bond. She did not yet have the language for that warmth, not precisely. It was something older, something that felt like a door she had spent 19 years pressing her back against, finally beginning to open from the other side. If the seal were broken, she said carefully, what would happen? Your wolf would come in, Marin said. A silver, most likely. And when a silver wolf comes in, particularly a moonstone silver, particularly near its fated mate, she stopped, started again. The bond would not come in quietly. Sarah lay back against the pillow. From somewhere far down the stone corridor outside, she heard the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, unhurried. She closed her eyes. She felt the warmth before she heard the door. The Alpha King stood in the doorway of the healer's wing for a moment before he entered, and Marin rose from her chair with a bow that was genuine rather than formal, and moved to the far side of the room with a quiet efficiency that left the space beside the bed empty. He sat in the chair. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at her with that same precise, unreadable expression, and she looked back at him with her hands folded on the blanket and her pulse doing something she was no longer able to attribute entirely to hunger. You collapsed in the corridor, he said finally. I am recovered. She paused. My lord. He looked at the bandage on her hand. He looked at the color in her face, or the lack of it. He looked at all the evidence of her body's failures with the steady, unblinking attention of his wolf, who she was beginning to understand was not separate from him, so much as it was the part of him that said what he would not. Devon found you, he said. He carried you here. I will thank him. You will rest. He said it simply, without inflection, as if it were simply a fact he was providing rather than a command. Marin will oversee your recovery. You will not return to corridor work until she confirms you are. I will be reassigned to the outer kitchens by week's end, Sarah said. He looked at her. He, by the order of Duchess Voss, passed through head steward Mira. She kept her voice even. Apparently my presence in the East Wing has been deemed inappropriate. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man whose wolf had just said something he was trying to decide whether to ignore. No, he said at last. That was all. No elaboration, no explanation, no political justification. Just no single, absolute closing a door. She looked at him. You cannot simply, I can. He met her eyes without apology. I just did. She thought about what Marin had told her. She thought about Faded and Moonstone and Silver and the warmth that moved through her every time he was close. That slow spreading heat like fire finding fuel. Why? She asked. Not defiantly. Genuinely. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he would not answer. Long enough that she began to prepare herself for him not answering. I don't know, he said. And the truth of it was in his voice, the bare, undefended quality of a man who had said something that surprised himself. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and between them, something moved in the air that neither of them reached for. Marin, in the corner, made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a cough, and was absolutely something else. 2 days after that, the seal began to break. It started with the heat. Not the heat of his presence, this was different. Interior, a burning in her sternum that woke her at 3 in the morning and sent her to the window of the healer's room to press her palms against cold stone. The forest below was dark and deep, the moon enormous above it, and Sarah stood at the window and felt something she had no words for yet, a pulling, as if the forest were a tide and she were on the shore. She heard the wolf then, not in the distance this time, inside. A sound like silver bells in a storm, a sound like a door being torn off its hinges from the inside. A sound like 19 years of pressure being removed in a single burning instant. She fell to her knees. Maren was beside her before she hit the floor, hands on her shoulders, her voice low and steady in the way of someone who has been waiting for this moment and prepared for it thoroughly. "Let it come," she said. "Do not fight it. It is yours. It has always been yours. Let it come." The burning spread from her sternum to her spine, to her fingers, to the soles of her feet. She pressed her hands into the stone floor and felt them change, not a full shift. Not yet, but a trembling at the edges of herself, a sense of depth that had never been there before, as though the world had suddenly acquired a dimension she had been living beside without being able to enter. And then presence, not Maren's, not hers. Another awareness, rising inside her like a tide coming in, warm and ancient and immeasurably patient. The silver wolf. Hers. Waiting exactly as long as it had needed to wait, and not one moment more. "I am here," it said, in no language that used words. "I have always been here." Sarah wept. She was not ashamed of it. She wept with her hands on the cold stone and her forehead pressed against the wall and Maren's warm hands on her back, and she wept for the child she had been, who had been told there was nothing, no wolf, no bond, no claim on any territory in the realm, and she wept for the years she had moved invisible and careful and small. She wept until there was nothing left to weep, and then she sat back on her heels and breathed. The warmth in her chest was steady and sure. It would not leave. She lifted her head through the closed door of the healer's wing, down the length of the stone corridor, past 2 guarded doors and a long gallery, and the east wing and the private quarters. She could feel him. The bond was a cord now, newly awake, pulling with the quiet insistence of a tide that had not yet fully come in. His wolf had known all along. She understood that now. The bread, the stockings, the no spoken into a room like a wall being placed between her and harm. His wolf had known, and it had been managing him carefully, one small act at a time, toward what it already recognized. Maren sat beside her on the floor. The old woman's face held the expression of someone who had lived long enough to see full circles completed. "It will be stronger now," she said quietly. "The bond, now that your wolf is awake." Sarah nodded. "He will feel it too." Maren paused. "He already feels something. I have watched him. He has been fighting it." She turned to look at Sarah directly. "He announced a queen 2 weeks ago. His council and his political obligations are a wall he has been told all his life to stay behind." A pause. "The question is whether the bond will be stronger than the wall." Sarah thought of iron-gray eyes, of one word, absolute and final, placed like a shield between her and an order she had had no power to fight. She thought of a silver wolf rising in her chest like a second heartbeat, ancient and certain. "Yes," she said quietly, "it will be." The morning that the Duchess Voss arrived at the palace, Sarah was in the east courtyard. She had been given, quietly and without explanation, a reassignment from corridor work to something that had never been offered to a serving Omega before, a place in the household records room, assisting with the inventory of ceremonial objects for the upcoming mating ceremony. She did not know who had arranged it. She suspected Marin. She also suspected, with less certainty and more warmth, that it had not been Marin's idea alone. The records room had a fire and a window. It was warm. She was not hungry. She was cross-referencing a ledger of Moonstone inventory when Nessa appeared in the doorway. Out of breath and pale in the particular way that Nessa went pale when something had gone wrong, with enough speed to shock her. "The Duchess is here," she said. "She arrived this morning. She is with Cressida. They are meeting with head steward Mira." Sarah set down her pen. "She knows about your wolf," Nessa said, and the words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them back since she'd heard them. "I was passing the hall outside Mira's office. I didn't stop. I just heard she knows it awakened. She said, Sarah. She said it needs to be rebound before the ceremony. She has someone. A practitioner. She said, if it's not done by tomorrow night, I cannot bind a wolf that has already come in," Sarah said. "She did it once before." The room was very quiet. Sarah stood up. She was steady. She was surprised by how steady she was. The warmth in her chest was a constant thing now, a presence, and it was not frightened. Her wolf was not frightened. She felt it in her blood, that old, patient certainty, silver and sure. "Where is he?" she asked. Nessa blinked. "The Alpha King is in the throne room. He has council meetings until." Sarah was already moving. She did not run. She walked, and she walked the way she had not walked before in this palace, not invisible, not careful, not pressed to the wall. She walked through the gallery and past the guards who saw her, and stepped aside with expressions they would later not be able to explain. And she walked through the tall iron doors of the throne room without being announced, which was not something that was done by anyone, let alone by a serving Omega who had been employed in the East Wing corridor 3 weeks ago. Every face in the room turned. The Beta Council. 4 lords of allied packs. Devon, standing at the Alpha King's right side, who saw her coming and said nothing, who did nothing to stop her. She noticed nothing at all, which told her things about what Devon had seen and what Devon had concluded and what Devon had apparently chosen. The Alpha King looked up from the document he had been reviewing. She stopped 10 feet from the dais. The silence in the throne room was absolute. She felt the bond between them snap taut, like a cord pulled straight, and she saw the moment he felt it too. The precise flinch of something that was not pain. The way his body went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. The way his wolf moved behind his eyes and looked at her with the recognition of something it had been waiting on for a very long time. "The Duchess Voss is in your palace?" she said. Her voice carried. It carried in a way her voice had never carried before, not loudly, but with a quality of resonance that moved the air differently, the silver in her blood making itself known. "She has a practitioner with her. She intends to rebind my wolf before tomorrow's ceremony, as she bound it when I was an infant." She looked at him steadily. "I am Sarah, daughter of Kerwin of the Moonstone bloodline. I am the last silver wolf in the Northern Realm, and I am your fated mate." The council erupted. The eruption was everything she had expected. Voices over voices, the Beta Council surging upright, a lord from the Western Pack slamming his hand on the table. She heard the word impossible, and she heard the word wolfless, and she heard the political calculations cracking open in real time, as every man in the room tried to reorganize what they had known about precedence and alliance, and the announced queen, and the compact that had already been made with the Crestmere pack. She stood in the middle of it. Her wolf was steady. She was steady. She watched him. He had not moved. He sat in his iron chair with the document still in his hand, and he looked at her, and she could not read his face, not fully, not entirely, but she did not need to. The bond told her what his face didn't. The warmth in her chest told her. The way his wolf pressed forward behind his eyes, no longer managing itself, no longer patient, no longer willing to be overruled by council protocol and political alliance and a compact that had been made without its consent. He stood. The room went quiet. "Everyone out," he said. It was not loud. It was not performed. It was the voice of a man whose wolf had finally been given permission to speak. Everyone went out. Davan was the last. He passed Sarah on his way to the door and looked at her, and in his expression she saw nothing of surprise, only a kind of long, exhausted relief. The expression of a man who had been watching something inevitable approach for months and was simply glad it had finally arrived. The door closed. She and the Alpha King stood in the empty throne room. He came down from the dais and stopped in front of her, and the warmth between them was no longer something she could mistake for anything but what it was, the bond, full and awake and undeniable, pulling them together with the gravity of a tide that had been waiting since before either of them had understood what waiting was. "Your wolf," he said quietly. "Silver," she said. "She has been waiting a long time." He looked at her. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tight, everything about him tight in the way of a man whose control was doing its last, furious work not against her. She understood, but against the enormity of what had just changed and what it would cost and what could not now be undone. "I announced a queen," he said. "I know. The compact with Crestmere I know." She looked at him directly. "I am not asking you to break your compact. I am not asking you for anything. I came here because the Duchess intends to take away the only thing I have ever had taken from me before I even knew I had it." A pause. "I will not allow that to happen again." He looked at her for a long time. "No," he said, and she understood this time that the word covered more ground than it had the last time he had said it to her. The mating ceremony was in 3 days. The Duchess Voss was escorted to guest chambers with a politeness that was, in the palace's particular language of power, the same thing as a cage. Her practitioner was identified a small, nervous man who had served the Voss household for 30 years and who, when faced with Beta Davan's absolute stillness and the prospect of a formal inquiry into illegal blood-binding, demonstrated considerably less loyalty to the Duchess than she had apparently relied upon. He talked. He talked in remarkable detail, actually. The seal, he explained, had been placed on Sarah the night after her father's death, before the infant had been transferred to Duchess Voss's care. Kerwin's death had not been an accident, a riding accident, officially, which the records supported because the records had been managed by people with an interest in managing them. The Duchess had known what Kerwin's bloodline carried. She had known what the moonstone silver could mean for a mate bond. She had known that the Alpha King, who would follow the old king, would need a fated mate of extraordinary bloodline, or no fated mate at all. Because a fated mate of such power could not be quietly redirected by politics and alliance, the bond would override everything. She had made her calculation 19 years ago, and she had been managing it since. Sarah sat with Marin in the healer's wing and listened to this account as Davan delivered it, and she felt her wolf receive the information like a stone being added to a pile that had been building for a long time. Not with shock. with the peculiar clarity that comes when a thing you have always half known is confirmed by someone who was not supposed to confirm it. She feared me, Sarah said. She feared what you would become, Marin said, and she was right to. Davan, who had remained impassive through the entire account, allowed himself one small expression at that. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. The matter has been referred to the High Council, he said. The Duchess and her practitioner will remain in the palace until a formal inquiry is convened. He paused. His Majesty has also sent formal notification to the Crestmere Pack. A longer pause. Lady Isolde has accepted the communication with considerable grace. It appears she was not entirely invested in the match. Sarah looked at him. Davan met her gaze with the absolute composure of a beta who had spent months managing a king whose wolf was increasingly unmanageable and was now, finally, at something approaching peace. She said, Davan continued, in a carefully neutral voice, that she had noticed he looked at the walls more than he looked at her. On the night before the mating ceremony, the threat came without warning. Sarah was in the eastern courtyard, unable to sleep, her wolf restless with the energy of a bond that was pulled taut and not yet completed when the smell hit her. Not a scent she had a name for yet, not from experience, but her wolf knew it immediately and threw up an alarm that bypassed every other sense. Hollow ones. She had heard the name in old stories, the kind Nessa whispered sometimes in the laundry room when the candles were low and the night was long. Shadow creatures from the break in the old wards, drawn to blood power and ancient bonds, to the places where the moon goddess's gifts were concentrated and bright. They had been absent from the northern realm for 2 generations. They had been considered myth by most of the current court. They were not myth. She was running before she had consciously decided to run, back toward the palace, her wolf senses flooding her with information. Her 19 years of wolfless human experience had no framework for yet direction, number, the particular cold, dark smell of them moving through the forest beyond the wall, coming fast, coming toward the concentrated warmth of the palace where a bond that should have been completed was still stretched and open and broadcasting its incompleteness like a beacon. She burst through the eastern door and collided with a chest that was not the wall. His hands caught her arms, and she looked up. They are here, she said. Hollow ones, the eastern forest. 8, maybe more. He looked at her with those iron-gray eyes, and in them she saw no surprise, only a sharp, immediate rearrangement, the shift from man to king in under a second. He released one of her arms and turned without letting go of the other. Davan, he said, and his beta was already there, already moving, already sending the signal through pack channels that would have the palace guard mobilized in under 3 minutes. But 3 minutes was not the math of Hollow Ones. They moved in the absence of light, and they aimed for the pulse of the bond, and the bond between Sarah and the Alpha King was the brightest thing in the northern realm on that particular night. Newly awakened and uncompleted, and singing its incompleteness into the dark. The first shadow hit the eastern wall. She heard it, they all heard it, a sound like cold iron on stone, a sound that was wrong at the frequency of it, that made the wolves in the palace react with an instinct older than language. He turned to her. She could see the calculation happening: duty, obligation, command structure, the need to be everywhere his pack needed him. She could see his wolf doing different math entirely. Stay with me, he said. It was not a command. It was the first time he had asked her for something. She looked at him. Her wolf was a silver fire in her chest. Her bond pulled tight, and the cold came through the wall like weather. And she thought of 19 years of alone, 19 years of invisible and careful and small, and the particular ache of knowing that the thing she had been told she lacked had been inside her all along. You will need to complete the bond, she said, to close the beacon. He looked at her. I know. You understand what that means. I understand completely what that means. His grip on her arm had not loosened. Something in his eyes had changed the control gone, or not gone, but put down deliberately. The way you put down a weight you have been carrying because your hands are needed for something else. I have understood it since the East Corridor. The second shadow hit the wall. Shouts from the guards outside. There was no more time for words. He pulled her through the door at the end of the corridor, down the passage she had never taken, into a room lit only by moonlight through a single high window, and she knew the scent of it, the moon pool, the sacred space where bonds were completed under the moon goddess's light. The water was still and silver, and the stone around it was worn smooth by centuries of ceremony. She turned to face him,